Let's go.
Let's go. Oh,
Do you want to?
sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Don't say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have rage issues.
I have nothing to prove to you. When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where it's Christmas time and we're really happy. So happy and joyful.
Yay.
So many things to celebrate this year. I'm Karen Peterson, joined as always by Lauren Humphreys Brooks.
Hello.
How are you, Lauren?
I'm doing all right.
Are you?
Doing all right. Yeah.
How was your Thanksgiving?
My Thanksgiving was lovely. Yes, fairly relaxing. Had a nice dinner, then got very stoned and thought about important things. So.
I'm sure you solved all the world's problems.
I did actually. Like, for instance, I felt that films should have music but no dialogue, and this was something that I thought of.
Did you invent silent film?
I did. No, but I was actually rewatching The Man Who Knew Too Much, and that's where this came from. So I was rewatching. It's the remake of The Man Who Knew Too Much, the 1956 one, and I think where this came to me was during the Albert Hall sequence, and I'm sitting there going like, "This is so good, right?" Because it is.
It is so good.
And at that point, I was like, "All films should be exactly like this. Why is that not a thing?" And Lauren, it is a thing. Like, it was a thing for a long time, actually.
Yeah, for a couple of decades.
Yeah.
Even. Yeah.
A good bit of film history, in fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm brilliant, man. Like,
that is so funny.
How about you? How was your
You're the
Thanksgiving?
It was nice. It was very quiet. I signed up to serve meals to the homeless. We didn't really serve meals. We prepared them to go out and be delivered. And then I spent the rest of it just watching movies. So it was lovely.
It's lovely. That's fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's after Thanksgiving, which means it's officially Christmas time.
Yes, it
Holiday
is.
time. Holiday time. There's other holidays too this month. We don't really talk about those much because I don't celebrate anything but Christmas, but there's other holidays too.
Yes, it's holiday season. It's the winter season.
Yes. But this month we are going to be talking about some holiday movies. Actually, I think all of them are Christmas movies, or at least set at Christmas time specifically. So yeah, we're going to do that. But we're going to kick it off this week with a movie I had never seen before. Had you ever seen it before?
I had never even heard of it.
Well, this was new to both of us, and it'll probably be new to all of you as well. And that is L'assassinat du Père Noël, which translates to Who Killed Santa Claus from 1941. Oh, why are you laughing?
I'm laughing because the reason why I suggested this film, I barely even suggested it. It was more like a moment.
I think you kind of suggested it as a joke at first.
And then initially I did, because I was actually looking at a list of I was looking for holiday noir to kind of, connect November to the holidays, and I was like, oh, well, what are some holiday noirs? And I came across a list on Letterboxd. I will try to find the list again because it had a lot of movies on it, but this was when I was like, 1941, Who Killed Santa Claus? Okay. and then the more that I began I looked up the plot, and then I went online and looked up more about it. It's just like, I'm kind of fascinated with this right now. I want to see this movie. No idea about the quality, no idea about anything, except that I was just really, really interested in the idea. And so that's kind of where it came from. And this is not a widely available film. It is on Internet Archive right now. And it does have subtitles, fortunately. That was one of the things I was worried about, actually, was that like you'd be able to find a version of the film, but without any English language translation.
It took me a minute to actually find the because I was like, well, closed captions. Okay. Oh, that's also how you turn on the subtitles. Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, there are English subtitles. You just have to click on the closed captions. And there are other places where you can download subtitles if you just have the film itself.
Yeah.
So
I have to say, because I do speak French, my French is not perfect. It's very, and it's also very rusty because it's been a long time since I've spoken it with on a regular basis. But I was really surprised at how clear and how easy to follow the language was. Especially, it's this movie is set in this little mountain town, and I expected the accent to be kind of harsh. And I was just like, oh, actually, no, I'm following this very, very well. So, yeah. The subtitles were very helpful, though. I could not have gotten through the whole thing without them. So, yeah. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about this movie. First of all, it does take place in the Alps in this little tiny village. And it's at Christmas Eve. And there's the man in the village who always dresses up every year as Santa Claus and goes around and meets with all the families and finds out what the children want, leaves some presents. Well, he's doing that. And at some point he gets attacked, and then they find Santa dead. And a very important relic, I guess, from the church is stolen. And there's a lot of suspects. So this film, before we dive into the actual details of the movie itself, this film was the first film produced by Continental Films, which was a German production company set up to make movies during the occupation of France at the beginning of World War II. So I think that's very important to note. I did notice when the movie was starting, I was just like, that Continental Films logo looks a lot like the Criterion one.
It's true. Well, and so I looked up a little bit about Continental Films. There's actually an entire book that came out recently about Continental Films, because it's one of those things that is complicated, because you're talking about an occupied nation where you have a lot of people who fled, but also a lot of people who stayed. Mm-hmm. And you have the Nazis coming in and setting up a production / distribution arm, basically. And these films this was not set up to be deliberate direct propaganda. So these are not films that are being produced. These are not like Triumph of the Will kind of films that are being produced by Continental Films. They're basically, it's how the French film industry continues to function under the Nazis. And so this is the same company that also produced, quite famously, a number of Henri-Georges Clouzot's films, including, I think it's The Murderer Lives at Number 21 and Le Corbeau, which is I rewatched The Corbeau, actually. It's one of my favorite films, but it's a fascinating film because it's a film that's being made under the Nazis, and at the same time is about like distrust and collaboration and a number of other things in this small French town. And it's one of those films that like the Nazis were like, hey, is this about us? And the French resistance was like, hey, is this about us? And so Clouzot kind of got away with a lot of things in that. And I think that there's an affinity between this film, Who Killed Santa Claus, and Le Corbeau, in the sense of depicting these interpersonal relationships within a small village and then something happens where mistrust and accusations, et cetera, begins to build. And it's interesting, given the historical context and given how the entire film plays out. So it's one of those times where it's just a fascinating kind of artifact and something to look at as being like not clear propaganda and not clear resistance to propaganda, but something kind of in the middle of all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that I mean, it's not uncommon. I mean, sorry. Art is political, and the
Yes.
art that people make and films that people make reflect the world that they live in and their views of it. Every movie experiences this. I have a friend who recently said that she didn't like reading the book Wicked, but loves the play because the book is too political. And I'm just like, I don't know how to break this to you. Yeah.
It's like, I mean, it's like the Wizard of Oz.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
the book, The Wizard of Oz. I have news for you about what that book is actually dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point is that, I mean, politics and the world that we live in is always infused into movies, whether that's conscious or not. And so for films to come out of this era and under the leadership of you know, people that are from Nazi Germany, there's going to be inherent politics and politicization in them, whether that's intended or not. And so no, it may not, these films may not be direct propaganda, but there's going to be some elements of that in it, just because that's the nature of humans and art in general.
Well, and yeah, like you say, all art is political, and we've talked before about how any films that are coming out of a particular time period, they're pushing a particular ideology in one way or another.
Right.
What is depicted, what isn't depicted, who is the hero, who is the villain, all of those things. I've talked before about, if you actually watch some of the films that were produced in Germany during this period, most of them are not, quote, propaganda in the form of something like The Triumph of the Will, the Leni Riefenstahl films. But and that's one of the insidious things about them, is that you watch them and they look like any Hollywood production from the 1940s. So you're just like, yeah, that's something that, you know, Cary Grant could have starred in like an American remake, something like that. And then you actually begin paying attention to what is being depicted and who the good guys are, who the bad guys are, how the entire narrative is shaped. And that's where it gets interesting. I think that one of the other sides that we tend to fall into, particularly sometimes when it comes to films made in Germany in this period, but especially films made in France of this period, is that we begin to look for resistance or capitulation, collaboration, right? So we want to see certain things as, this is actually, you know, slyly mocking the Nazis, or this is, you know, actually feeding into their ideology. And sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. But so one of the films that I referenced was Le Corbeau, and literally everyone had a problem with that film because the French were saying like, no, this is showing us to be like weak and backbiting and sniping, and that we all hate each other. And the other side of it was just like, well, this is, you know, this is about resistance to this imposition of authority and the power of, like, you know, the people, you know, the questioning of people in power and things like that. And, you know, and however you want to read the film, I think that all of the readings are wrong to a certain degree, because the film is about human nature and is about the way that people react to an incident in a very small town where everybody knows each other. And I think that there's something similar going on in Who Killed Santa Claus. It's not, this is resistance or it's not resistance. This is capitulation. It's not capitulation. It's, this is how people function. This is how people respond to authority. And respond to something when you're in a very small and close-knit society where something happens and kind of all the nastiness emerges from within. Yeah. And in this case, you have someone who is treated like an outsider, who isn't actually an outsider, but has been gone for a long time, and kind of upsets the balance of what's been happening in town. And then someone who's supposed to be well respected turns out to not be someone that that deserves so much respect. You know, it's an interesting collection of people, and it's an interesting look at
this type of a society, this small insular society, and how people very quickly can turn on each other the second something upsets the balance and the delicate, precarious,
Well, and everybody being up in each other's business all the time. Everybody knows everybody else. Everybody grew up together. Their families have been intertwined for generations. And part of it is that they're isolated. It's Christmas time in the Alps. There's tons of snow. There are authorities, but the authorities are very distant. And the authorities that are present, people like the mayor and the constable, et cetera, also have all of their prejudices against everybody else, and have the way that they're operating as well. So it's this interesting kind of microcosm that I think is fascinating to watch, particularly given the context.
Yeah. So let's talk specifics about the movie, shall we? So it opens up with it's right before Christmas, and we spend a lot of time just getting to know the people in this town. We get to meet the kids at school and the local chemist, and there's this woman who wanders around town looking for her cat, and sorry. I keep getting distracted. There's a dog on my foot. Anyway, so we spend a lot of time with these people. It's a very long time before the murder actually happens. So we just really get to know these people from one way. And then after things really start to ramp up, then we start to learn other things about them. So I think that the setup is interesting. I think that it kind of made it feel a little bit slower than I expected for a movie that's under 2 hours long and is supposed to be sort of a murder mystery, but also has some elements of comedy in it.
Yeah.
I saw it billed as a comedy, and I'm like, I don't know if all of it lands, but definitely some of it is very funny. What did you think about the comedy?
I enjoyed the comedy. I like the I like these kinds of films. I like the sort of insular small town movies.
Yeah.
Like you could literally just like all of these interpersonal relationships and the politicking and, so-and-so is in love with so-and-so, but she doesn't want to get married. And so-and-so used to have an affair with this person who's now crazy, all of these things, and kind of centered around this toy maker who plays Santa Claus every year. Right. And I liked that there's kind of a sort of a Ray Bradbury-esque element to, and I guess this dandelion wine kind of thing, where you can see that something is building and something is going to go wrong, right? So you've got the attack on the priest, right? In because they have the Ring of Saint Nicholas, I think it's called.
Yes.
And they have this artifact that they display every year. And there's this whole argument about like, well, you shouldn't really display it because it's actually a priceless jewel, right? And someone's going to steal it, and lo and behold, someone steals it. But I liked the slowness of the buildup and the introduction of the Baron, who comes back to this village after 10 years away. And everyone's like, oh my God, the Baron's back. And then everyone is talking about what is with the Baron. Like he's not interacting with anyone. And we find out more about him. And that whole like portion of the plot, I was like, what is going on? Like what direction is this story going? So you get the Baron, who's this, charming, good looking young man who like kind of wants to be left alone by everybody. And he brings, I think, the local chemist in, right? Yep. And then essentially tells him, I have leprosy.
Yeah. And he wants this particular, like, it's not quite a medication, but some kind of oil that they use to treat it. Yeah. And the chemist actually figures out, oh, well, if you're asking for this, that's used for leprosy. And he's just like, well, yeah. So, yeah. And I mean, the Baron has been traveling all over the world. and for years. He's been gone for 10 years, traveling everywhere. And so it kind of it's like, oh yeah, you know what, at this period of time it kind of makes sense that he would have ended up at some point contracting leprosy. I can see how that could happen, you know. And that gives him a perfect excuse to isolate himself, but it also makes things a little bit complicated because he has a crush on Catherine, who is the toy maker's daughter, who someone else is in love with her, but she's not in love with that guy. The love triangle is fun.
Yeah, and there's this whole thing about her living in this kind of fantasy world.
Yeah.
That, you know, so she's the toy maker's daughter. She like has all of these ideas and ideals. Like so one of the first scenes that we see her in is her and talking with this young man who wants to marry her, right? And there's this whole thing about like she should just get married and have a couple of kids and she'll get over all of the like fantasy stuff.
Yep, because that solves everything.
But she's essentially type out like, you know, why aren't you riding around on a white horse kind of thing? Like she has this whole ideal about what romance is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And when she finds out about the Baron's disease, that no one wants to go anywhere near him, right? Because of the leprosy, which is understandable.
Yeah, which is very contagious, even still.
Yeah. And so she's like, well, I will, right? I'll go take care of him. And so it kind of reinforces this sort of romantic notion that she has. But at the same time, it's what kind of makes them interact and become more intimate, and sort of shows to him that, you know, he doesn't need to isolate himself. And that he can actually have someone who wants to be around him, not in spite of, but almost because of this disease that he supposedly has. So it's, I don't know, I've found the whole buildup really interesting because you get to know the personalities of each of these characters, and the relationships that are going on, the gossiping, right? So the Baron tells the chemist, right, and he knows, and the part of the point is he knows everybody's going to know within 10 minutes of this guy leaving, because he's going to tell everybody. It's going to get passed around the entire village.
There's no such thing as what's the word?
Privacy?
No, not that. I mean, yes, that, but also privilege. Like there's no privilege here. It's not privileged information. The chemist isn't going to keep that to himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You also get to spend a lot of time getting to know the children in this village, which for some reason are all boys. Doesn't bode well for the future survival of this small town. What's that?
I didn't notice that they were all boys. There are no little girls. Yeah,
there are no girls.
I think that's interesting too.
Yeah. And but you have one that's very sickly. He has some sort of a condition with his legs, and he's not able to walk. And he has dreams of what he wants Santa to bring him. All the kids do. And but you also get to see how these children, who are the next generation, what they think of and what they observe with the adults around them, and basically what they're learning about life and about society, and the messages that they're internalizing. It's like they all know that this town is full of crazy people too, you know. And they kind of immerse themselves in it and become part of it. And so I think from that, looking at the generational aspect of it too, I think is it's very interesting, because I think a lot of times people do get so caught up in their own drama that they forget that the kids are watching. And this movie makes it very clear that these children are watching.
Well, it's interesting because the three boys, right? The one who is unable to walk, and then he has two brothers. They're the children of the caretaker of the castle, right? The chateau.
Yeah.
who is saying like, she wants to leave because her master has leprosy. And she's like, I've got to get out of here, etc. Meanwhile, the two brothers are constantly like trying to include their brother who can't walk in their games. Like they are, they're trying to encourage him. Well, why don't you try to get up? Right. They want to bring him out into that. And actually, one of the things I really liked about this is this desire that the children have of not ostracizing anyone, of being like, we want you to be a part of this. Meanwhile, some of the things that they are being shown is exactly ostracization, right? And it's done in a much gentler and lighthearted way in a lot of ways. Like this could have gone a lot darker. But I like that little turn of like, we're taking care of each other. The children are taking care of each other, even if they're not being shown that by the adults.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So things do start to get underway. And so Cornus, the toy maker, he dresses up as Santa, as he always does, and he starts going house to house, drinking a lot. At one point, someone says he had 42 glasses of wine and brandy over the course of like 6 hours.
Yeah. I love that. And this is like a habitual thing every Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and shockingly, he's not the one that dies.
He's drunk.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. So he goes from house to house. It's really funny because he just kind of is talking to the parents about what do your kids want. It's such an interesting take because here in the United States, it's fun to see how other countries handle certain traditions. Because like here in the United States, you go to the mall. I mean, how many times have we seen A Christmas Story, which takes place around the same time as this does? And it's, it's the mall Santa, and you talk to him weeks before Christmas, you write him a letter, things like that. And in this case, it's Santa kind of going around and making his visits and kind of gathering the information. And but really it's a time to visit and to kind of spread goodwill and cheer, and to drink excessively. And it's so funny. Like I really enjoy this sequence as he's making his visits, because it's so funny just watching him get progressively more just like bumbling and stumbling around, but he still keeps doing it because he has so much love for this town and just really values the tradition that has been going for 30 years. It's cute and it's funny.
Well, and I like this. So the actor who plays Santa Claus is actually Harry Baur, who was actually eventually killed by the Gestapo in 1942 because of his
really?
Yeah, his wife was accused of like conspiracy or something like that, and he went and defended her and wound up being
I didn't know that's
tortured.
What happened to him.
Being tortured by the Gestapo, yeah. And so, not to bring it down, but
a little bit.
But so this is a major French actor of this time period, and he was later cited by Rod Steiger as being one of Rod Steiger's major influences. But so he's so funny in this. Like he's so charming. He is just like this kind of meandering, sort of ridiculous man, but he's just spreading this cheer. And watching this, I was like, please don't tell me he's gonna die.
I know, I felt that too.
Yeah, who's gonna murder this Santa Claus and why? Like, why would you do that?
Right.
So I was really relieved actually when because there was a certain point where like so he goes to visit the Baron, right? And he's drunk off of his head by that point. And then it's quite obvious that then like, oh, the Baron,
and it's his daughter that the Baron is connecting with and
it's like
falling in love with.
Exactly. And so and the Baron is like arranged to meet her right, in town and have dinner with her for Christmas Eve. And then it's quite obvious that the Baron then switches puts on his costume.
Yeah.
And goes out, and then but someone else is like following the Baron around. I was just like, okay, if the Baron dies, I'm okay with that. I do not want the toy maker to die.
Right.
This is very like, all right, he's safe, he's okay. Whatever is going on, he's not going to be the one killed.
Yeah. But the two of them have this interesting conversation, even while Santa is very drunk, Cornus. Because the Baron starts talking about all the stories, because Cornus also makes globes, and he paints them, and he tells stories from all around the world. And particularly he tells a lot of stories about the time he spent in China. And so the Baron basically tells him that was what inspired him to go travel the world. And he was looking specifically for this man that Cornus had always talked about, this man that was in China who had this daughter. And he thought, oh, maybe I'll go find her and I'll marry her. And he traveled the whole world looking for this person, and realized eventually that the stories had all been about Cornus, and that it was his daughter that he'd been talking about. And I think that's such an interesting element. And I couldn't quite decide, and I'm curious what you think about this. I couldn't quite decide if the Baron was trying to thank Cornus for like encouraging him to go out and see the world, or if he was kind of like, yeah, I wasted a lot of time. If you would have just told me who this was.
Well, I think that it's both, in a certain sense, that he's talking about like that the conclusion is that he went all around the world and found what he was actually looking for in his own backyard, right?
Yeah.
That was basically what it was all about. At this time, and I think that, so let's talk about the Baron's leprosy a minute, because it turns out that he doesn't actually have leprosy.
He doesn't. He's lying.
Yeah, he was lying. So he just wanted to be left alone, right? So, but part of that is that he's trying to isolate himself. He's trying to make himself apart from the village, right? He doesn't want to be bothered, basically. And the fact that someone does in fact bother him, despite the story that he's telling about himself, is what eventually leads him into like falling in love and finding out that, you know, this thing is that all of these stories, etc., was actually really about his home. So I think that in terms of so in watching the scene between him and Cornus before you know that he's actually lying about his leprosy, there is almost this accusation of like, well, if I hadn't gone out into the world, right, I would never have become a leper and I wouldn't have to be isolated here.
Right.
But we find out that it's not true. Exactly. And so I think that there's a little bit more of like him needing to, you know, whether or not he recognizes it, but him needing to have gone out into the world in order to come back. And in order to see that what he was actually looking for was there all the time. And that's a very, in a lot of ways, that's a very kind of common story about, you know, coming home, et cetera, that you go out and you see everything. And then you realize that what you actually want is something that was always like right next door to you. But you have to have had that experience before you can even do that, because there's always going to be that question of what does the world look like out there, right? And you're talking about a town where you've got the Baron, who's very wealthy and everything, that's able to do this, but you're talking about a town that is still incredibly insular and closed off from the rest of the world, and isn't able to, you know, you've got all of those fantasies that are definitely there, and that there's a lot of, as we watch, there's a lot of like festering in this town. There's a lot of people who are festering and twisted and unhappy because they're so isolated with each other, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know if that all makes sense, but it
makes sense to me. So yeah, so Santa Claus does get knocked out at the Baron's house. Baron takes his clothes and goes out as Santa Claus. And then we see Santa go into the church during midnight Christmas Eve mass. I don't know if it's supposed to be midnight, but it's definitely Christmas Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And then stumble out into the night, and somebody realizes that the ring of Saint Nicholas is gone, and so they're searching for it. One of the things that I love is that even though people saw who they thought was Cornus as Santa come into the church, nobody really thinks it was him at first.
Yeah.
Like, this is a town where everybody does know everybody pretty much, and he's not the prime suspect, even though he was the one seen right there. You know, it's just this, like, they just trust him so much and they know him so well that it wouldn't even cross their mind that he would do something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Until more evidence starts to point at him, and then some people start to think, I think there's something off. But but yeah, so basically that is kind of what ends up happening, though, is that the ring disappears. So then everybody's looking for it. They're trying to find the culprit, and then it sets up this sort of cascading set of circumstances where things just get progressively a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more frantic. And then the two brothers, whose sick little brother is in bed, he's sad because Santa Claus skipped him and didn't come to see them. And so the two brothers decide, we're going to go find Santa and bring him back here. And they go climb a mountain because it's the Alps, and why not? And they find Santa, not on any road. They just find him on a mountain, dead.
I love this whole concept of like that they're just like, oh, these two little boys on Christmas Eve are just wandering around in the snow on a mountain. Just, of course, it's the Alps. Like, of course they are. They're used to it.
I mean, that's just what the Alps look like. There's no roads. So, yeah. So they find Santa dead. How they know that he's dead? Well, we're told that he has been shot in the head, even though there's no blood because it's 1941. But anyway, so Santa's been shot in the head. But the problem is Santa is not Cornus and is not the Baron either. It's a stranger. So I think the real question is, who the heck is Santa Claus?
Who is Santa Claus? Did Santa steal the ring, and then who killed Santa Claus?
Yeah. And and this is all, by the way, like 70 minutes into an hour and 43-minute movie that all of this starts to happen. And so we've gotten just a lot of not build up, but just a lot of introducing and getting to know these characters and really understanding sort of the life in this town. And then boom, everything starts to happen. And so we have this stranger who's dressed in the Santa Claus suit, who has been killed but doesn't have the ring on him. And nobody knows who this person is. Then they go to Cornus, who is very, very drunk, he finds the ring in one of his globes on his sign outside his shop. But by the time he tries to get to it, it's gone. And gosh, what even else happens? It's like so many things start to happen all at once. And what we really see in all of this is just sort of how, even though this is a town where everybody knows everybody, people like and trust each other, it turns out that there's so much under the surface that nobody ever talks about that just is so fragile and starts to collapse as soon as one thing upsets the balance. Well, I mean, it's a murder, but still.
Yeah, but it's one of those things. So it's that suddenly there's like this fostering of mistrust and like, well, and everybody has different motives for like, so the and I'm trying to remember the character's name, but the young man who's in love with the toy maker's daughter, right, starts accusing the Baron because he knows that like the Baron and the toy maker's daughter kind of have a thing going, and this all begins to develop, and then other characters like accuse other people because they're like, well, we had an affair years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so all of those things kind of like erupt from the bottom, and you begin seeing like those kind of the tensions that have already been hinted at, but that are now like actually coming to the fore. So you've got this catastrophic event, this catastrophic event. Someone is dead. We don't know who it is, and this ring has been stolen. Who did it? Right. And everyone has different ideas about who did it. And of course, in the midst of all of this is the actual killer.
Right. Yeah. Who could be anybody. And I mean, I figured out who it was going to be like the second the person came on screen. I don't know about you, but I was just like, oh, that guy. He's a murderer. At the beginning of the movie, I was like, I have no idea what's happening, but that guy did it.
That guy did it. Whatever happens, he did it. And you were right. Good for you.
Yep.
One of the things that I really like in this film actually is that there's a running joke about the cops trying to get there.
Yeah.
And because they are able to contact like the next big city, right? And so like, this is what has happened. We don't know who this person is. Can you please come and help us? And essentially, like, there's been a snowstorm. And they keep on getting messages just like the police are now east of us. And then they get another message just like the police have now moved west.
18 kilometers east. They're 22 kilometers south. What are they doing?
And it's very funny because you've got like just like what, and everyone remarks on it, just like what is happening? Mm-hmm. How have they managed to get further away?
Yeah. In the wrong direction. By the way, the nearest city to them is Grenoble, which is in the Alps, but it's in the French Alps.
So you've got like this running joke about that, but there's also an element, and I think that the ending undermines it, and I think there's a reason why the ending undermines it, but there's this running joke about the authorities being unreliable. Mm-hmm. And incapable of actually doing anything. And that includes the authorities within the town because they all have their own agendas, right? Yeah. And their own and they're also suspects within themselves. So you've got groups of people that are like the authorities of the town, but they're just as suspect as everybody else. And then you've got this running joke about the actual supposed broader authorities being unable to reach the town because of its isolation. And that turning into this sort of like, oh, isn't this ridiculous kind of thing.
Right. And it gets progressively funnier every time there's an update. But so they're trying to figure this out themselves while they're waiting for the cops to come. And eventually they do. The crime gets solved. But it brings so many things together all at once, because this lady who's been wandering around looking for her cat, turns out her cat's not missing. Her cat's dead and has been and was stuffed. And what else happens right here? It's just kind of this interesting crescendo of things.
Well, we find out that she had an affair with the chemist. Right. And that he left her and and according to her, killed her cat. Mm-hmm. So whether or not that's true, she's also crazy.
She probably killed her own cat.
Yeah. That's the thing. There's all of this doubting of what is truth at that point, because you can't really rely on her testimony about what has happened. Right. And so you've got these things that are being then exposed. You've got Cornus, who is like having an absolute breakdown, and then the boys come and steal his globe in which the ring was. Mm-hmm. But the ring isn't in the globe anymore, and so they're all searching for the ring,
right?
Because it's probably fallen out somewhere. And so you've got all of these different things that are happening. It's just like, how does all of this actually come together? But it's that chaotic nature. It's it goes back to the chaoticness of human nature, I think. Yeah. That everybody has ulterior motives. Everybody has, and sometimes they're ulterior motives, but they're not even motives per se. They're just panic. Right. They're just people who have like decided to do something. So the boys go and steal the globe because they want to bring it to their younger brother. because that's what he wanted for Christmas.
Mhm.
And they don't know any of the other things that are going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they kind of accidentally set off a chain of events. And but then what eventually ends up happening is the police from outside do show up. And this is where I think you kind of reference this too, where there's a little bit of undermining the ridiculousness of the authorities, because the police show up and it turns out that all this, oh, they're this far away and now they're in the wrong direction and farther away. It turns out that was all part of their plan. They were actually doing their police work. They were doing their job and tracking down the ring and figuring out what really happened. And so it turns out that the outside authorities are the heroes of this story. And if there's some propaganda in this movie, I might say that might be part of it.
Well, you see, exactly. And so like it's this is where I think this film is interesting, right? So you've got the first film that is being produced under the Nazis in occupied France, by a German run but French production company, right? That's what Continental Films was set up as. And the story itself has all of these elements. It's got that undermining of authority. It's got that issue of the chaoticness of human nature, the kind of backbiting of people within the construct of this town, but also the love and the care that they are giving each other, taking care of the weak, taking care of the injured and the disabled. And then at the very end, it's just like, well, actually, the outside authorities were in charge this entire time. They are the true benevolent people who come in and they explain everything. They catch the killer, they catch the thief, and everything is perfect now. So yeah, I think that that's where you get that authoritarianism that is creeping in, and that is going to be a part of these kinds of stories, but that at the same time can be recognized by the viewer. And does this really work for the entire for the film that we've actually that we've been watching? No, not really. It's very sudden. It's very quick. Like it's like, and here's the solution,
right? Which. I don't want to say who it was, because I know there are some people listening to this who haven't seen it before. And I know we've spoiled pretty much the entire movie, but I want to keep that part as a surprise.
All right, we'll keep it as a surprise. But it's just such a sudden ending in that sense. Like, it's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I do think that there is, not necessarily a resistance element going on there. I wouldn't push it that far, but there's definitely a like, okay, it's sort of like in Hollywood films where you can tell they've decided to capitulate to the Hays Code, but they refuse to change anything else. And so it's like, and all right, fine, it's this guy, fine, whatever. It's that sort of thing.
Yeah, the ending does seem so sudden, though, too, that when I was looking, because I saw how much time there was left on the movie, and I was just like, but there's only 5 minutes left, and they still haven't even revealed the killer. And they kind of just do the end, and so it's just like, oh, okay. But that's the thing, is really this movie, even though it's called Who Killed Santa Claus, it's really not about that. I think, not about the specific literal murder of the guy dressed in the Santa suit, but I think it sort of plays on just sort of this town, the secrets being revealed, and the loss of trust and faith in each other through this experience is sort of another death of the innocence that Santa Claus brings, and this this perpetual hope and joy that is part of the Santa Claus legend.
Well, and you've got at the very end, you've got this kind of uplift where the entire town basically brings the globe right to the boy, and he gets up, right? He walks to Santa. And everything, but again, there's element, and it's an uplifting ending and everything, but there is this element of falseness to it, I think, because of everything that we've seen before. And I feel like, whether or not you want to say it's deliberate, it does have that sensation of it being tacked on. of like, we're now, and everyone comes together under the benevolence of, childhood and Santa and the authorities who are caring for everyone. It's just like, but is that really what we've watched? Is that really what we've seen over the past hour and a half?
Right.
Not so much. And that's where I think that this film is more interesting than it could have been, because it could have all been building to that ending. It could have all been reinforcing that, but it allows the ending to feel tacked on.
That's true. Very true. Any other thoughts about Who Killed Santa Claus?
Like I say, I find it really fascinating. I'm particularly interested in this whole idea of these films, and maybe it's because of the current period in which we live, films being made under a totalitarian power, and how, and Nazism and fascism and the way that Germany invaded France, etc., is like, in a lot of ways, it's very extreme. But I also then, we were talking about the Hays Code. I also don't think about the way that films were censored within Hollywood, the way that films are controlled by, not in like the intense totalitarian way that the Nazis did, but not without similar tactics. Like, you're not going to be executed for breaking the rules in Hollywood in the 1940s, but you might be blacklisted for it. Yeah. And that sort of shaping of narratives that, the powers that be sort of want to be able to control everything. And how you can actually make films within that sort of a structure, within that, and not make them necessarily resistance films, but also not make them pure propaganda. Yeah, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah. You're very smart.
Everything is made under the auspice of authority when you're talking about mainstream filmmaking. Like,
yeah,
the occupied France is just sort of an extreme example in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah. But it's such an interesting period of time. And just to your point about how it's interesting to go back and revisit this period in our history, considering what we're currently looking at and what may or may not happen to us in the next few years, and just sort of this. Sorry. I heard this sound behind me. I was like, what is that? The dog, he's snoring. I'm sorry, I'm boring you. But yeah, it's just sort of looking at this as a snapshot of the past, but also a warning of what things could look like. And hopefully we won't get there. Hopefully we can, at least some of us, enough of us, can learn from the past. I don't know.
Well, and I think that's where it's important to look at things like Continental films, and because we have this tendency to, when we talk about this time period, we have this tendency to be like, you were either the good guys, you were either the French Resistance, right? Or you were collaborating with the Nazis. And what we're talking about when you talk about something like Continental films is people who were not, some of whom were probably definitely collaborators, and some people who weren't.
Right.
And some people who are just trying to continue to survive in very bad circumstances. And that's one of the things that we have to understand. And I think that particularly in our time period in the United States is something we really have to understand, that, the black and white kind of view of history is not going to work. And the reality of how people had to live and function and create art is something we need to understand, and we need to interact with more. We need to understand those gray areas a lot more and participate in them a lot more. I also always think about the fact that we talk about the Hays Code and the production code as though they were impositions. These were things that Hollywood agreed to.
Right.
Hollywood didn't, there was no government telling them you have to do this. They decided to do this. The studios made a decision to adhere to these guidelines. And that's something we have to remember, that you can only be censored if you agree to be censored.
That's a very good point, yeah.
And that's what the Hollywood studios did. So And then you have artists within that system working around it and finding ways of, not completely breaking it, but undermining it. We've talked about that in the past. We've talked about those films that don't fall under, that like manage to actually push the Hays Code really, really far. And that's something that we have to remember as well. So particularly going into whatever the next few years are going to bring.
Yeah,
we need to look at this in a nuanced way.
Yeah. And we talk about this a lot, but I think this is one of the reasons why it's so important to expand your view and watch and interrogate and interact with historical film, and really look at movies from this time period, and really not just the what's the like, not just American ones, not just like the happy raw, like go America war films, but looking at movies that were coming out of Germany, coming out of occupied France, coming out of, London during the Blitz, things like that, like really looking at the people who were actually suffering or perpetrating in some cases, and really looking at what was going on there and what their art was telling us, and really looking at how it relates to the world that we're in and how we can avoid the same fate.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, all you said before, all art is political, all film is political. And that includes light movies and musicals. And I've said it before, the majority of films that were produced in Germany under the Nazis were not propaganda films. They were not documentaries about how great the Nazis were. They were musicals and historical dramas. They look like any Hollywood film in the same period. And it's really important to recognize that, because that's what propaganda actually looks like. And that is the kind of films that get produced in the United States today. Yeah. That is something you have to pay attention to. What are you being sold? And also, what are you not being sold?
Exactly.
If we're being sold a certain view of America, what view of America aren't we being sold? And what are they leaving out? Yeah. What isn't being marketed to us? Yeah, exactly. And that's true for every single piece of entertainment. It's not just the serious films, it's Marvel movies too. Like, it's all of it. What are they trying to sell you?
Yeah. I mean, really, that's so true. Really look at what it's going to sound silly, but really look at the arguments in Captain America Civil War. Yeah. And I mean, that is probably the most political of all the Marvel movies. And it actually has some really important things to say about whose responsibility it is to take care of the problems of the world. And there's arguments about that and friends fighting over it. And yeah. And then I think about movies like last year, the big surprise, quote unquote, hit last year, that Tim Ballard Operation Underground Railroad movie, the human trafficking. And like, I know so many people who went to see it and were just like, oh, this is so inspiring. Like, yeah, it's so fake, and just deifying these real people because, oh, I saw it in a movie, and that, therefore this person really is deserving of all these accolades and is really this big hero. And, so many, if it's based on a true story, remember it is not a true story. It's, it's inspired. It takes some things from what really happened and then completely Hollywoodizes it.
Propaganda is constructed to appeal to your emotions. It's and it isn't constructed very often not constructed to appeal to your logic, but to your emotions. It is intended to make your emotions override your logical thought. And some of the and that's one of the things that art also does. Art appeals to our emotions. It makes us feel things. Yeah. And it does it in very complex ways, but you can't just pretend that, because I agree with it or because it's presenting me with a particular argument that makes sense to me, that therefore it is not propaganda. It is. I've said it before, and I encourage everybody, if you're really interested in film, but even if you're not really interested in film, just interested in how art operates, read Siegfried Krakauer's From Caligari to Hitler. It is about it's not about Nazi Germany, it's about the lead up to Hitler. And the films that were produced both before Hitler came to power and then in the 1930s, kind of before the actual advent of World War II. But it's investigation of how propaganda operates and how it reflects the the emotions of the time period and the emotions of the psychology of a society. That's what Krakauer is supposed to be is saying that he's investigating. It's the psychology of an entire nation. And even to just read the introduction, and I promise you will be fucking terrified of how applicable it is to our current moments.
Yeah.
But it's also very, very important. I'm not saying that, it actually in some ways reassures me because it's something that we can look at critically, and we can notice it in ourselves and not simply, give over to whatever is being sold to us.
Right.
Anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
From Caligari to Hitler. Come on, people read it.
It's a good book. I have that one. All right. I think that's it for this week. Yeah.
I think that'll close us out. Yeah. Nice light opening to our holiday season.
Yeah. Well, next week we're going to talk about definitely not political because nothing's political, right? We're going to do a propaganda. Yeah. We're going to do a double feature next week. We are talking about the bishop's wife and the preacher's wife, which are two slightly different versions of the same story. One stars Cary Grant and one stars Denzel Washington. So perfect. So yeah, that's what we're going to do next week. And in the meantime, you can find all of our episodes. You can get our bonus episodes if you subscribe to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/citizendame. And we would like to thank all of our patrons who help keep the show going. They are Abby, Ollie, Audra, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Ferdinand, Heather, James, Judy, Carriata, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Noel, Robert, Steve, Sharon, and Tao. And over there right now, we are wrapping up our Flag Means Death bonus series. I apologize for not getting the most recent episode up this week. It's coming. It's there by the time you're hearing this. And our finale episode is this week, and I have feelings.
And then we're gonna start all over again. No.
Right. Yes. And then we're gonna start it over again, episode 1. No, we are gonna be in the process of looking for what our next bonus series will be. So if you have suggestions, we'd love to hear it, but we also have a few ideas too. Anyway, so that's over on our Patreon. You can also support the show a couple other ways. We have, another way. We have our Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/citizendame. And I'm currently working on getting the store set up on the website. It's taking a while. It's complicated. It's very, very complicated. Anyway, but you can go to our website, citizendamepod.com, and see all kinds of work that we've been doing there. And you can also reach out to us if you'd like. Our email is citizendamepod@gmail.com, and we're on social media. You can find us on Instagram @citizendamepod, also Blue Sky, citizendamepod. And we are a Letterboxd HQ @citizendame. You can also find us individually. Lauren, where are you?
where am I? I'm on Instagram and Letterboxd @LHBusiness.
And I am all the places @Karen M. Peterson. So that is it for this week. Thank you so much, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.
Santa Claus is dead.
Jason, why don't you tell Maya everything that's happened?
Wait, really? Santa Claus is dead?